So Rebel Wisdom released another part of the Ken Wilber interview, and in this one they're talking about the JBP and Sam Harris debate on what is truth. I don't know about you, but it sure would have made this debate a lot easier to digest if Ken Wilber had been in the limelight to comment on it. So there are just a couple of concepts that Wilber brought up that I want to talk about as they relate to the metaphysics of quality, and these concepts are novelty and truth. Wilber is saying that each of the two are stuck in their respective quadrant, and so they are arguing at cross purposes.
From this perspective, Harris was insisting on a scientific, objective definition of truth, while Peterson was more interested in a cultural definition, truth as culturally agreed and transmitted through myth and story. For Integral, both are right, but incomplete.
For Wilber, the solution to this is to become attuned enough to the ground of being, let's say, so that you can see that each way of the quadrants is true. You really have to be outside of the quadrant to see that each one is its own variation of the truth, but that each version is incomplete, although they are each true. But first I want to comment on something interesting that Wilber mentions.
And there either is the creative advance into novelty, or there isn't. And I find the creative advance into novelty much, much more reflective of the world as it is arising.
The creative advance into novelty was what philosopher Alfred North Whitehead characterized as the inclination of the universe toward more complexity, more diversity, and more wholeness, towards the better. And you can trace this evolution if you look at atoms to molecules to single-celled to multi-celled organisms to the reptilian brain to the mammalian brain and to the human neocortex. And this is a pattern that is eternal. This pattern pulls in one direction or the other towards entropy or towards evolution. And this pull has influenced everything all throughout time, one pulling us toward the eternal light and the other pulling us down towards infinite darkness. One towards heaven, you could say, and the other towards hell. And you see this in the metaphysics of quality, where evolution leads to more complexity and to more freedom. But going backwards, entropy can lead to the death of a species, for example, or the end of cultures and civilizations, or towards Lila being hauled away to the psych ward. So you could say the creative advance into novelty is good and entropy is evil. And I do think that that is the moral framework of the metaphysics of quality. It is the definition of good and evil in the metaphysics of quality, more or less. Creative advance into novelty is also, I think, another way to describe dynamic quality. And Whitehead was indeed an influence on Pirsig, and we know with the metaphysics of quality that the universe is ratcheting up towards more complexity, and as Daniel Dennett articulated, more freedom. In terms of the metaphysics of quality, we're always evolving towards what's better and what is more free. A rock, an inorganic pattern, can't move. A cow can run across a field, and man can go to the moon. So here's a quote about dynamic quality that I think reflects this. Dynamic quality is not structured, and yet it is not chaotic. It is value that cannot be contained by static patterns. What the substance-centered evolutionists were showing with their absence of final mechanisms or programs was not an airtight case for the biological goallessness of life. What they were unintentionally showing was that the patterns of life are consistently evolving in response to something better than what these physical laws have to offer. And that is Pirsig, 1991, so that's from Lila. That sense of newness or of novelty is what elicits a sense of the better. It is the detection of novelty that propels dynamic quality into gear. Even if that novelty is bad, let's just say a bear is attacking you out of nowhere, or some animal. your impulse is to make that situation better, is to alleviate the situation, and you do that with a creative solution, even if it's right in the moment. It is an emergent creativity in that situation. And obviously, if that novelty is good or is just interesting, you're drawn toward it. In either case, novelty sparks dynamic quality, and that's why on the neurophysiological level, by Jaak Panksepp, it's called the seeking system. So look at the picture of the cat being beguiled by the shoelace. The sense of newness inspires positive emotion and or creativity. So now let's talk about, to some extent, truth. The ultimate truth is, as Wilber says, comes from a stance of meditative consciousness. A reflection on this state figures into both JBP's and Sam Harris's quadrants. For JBP, it's pragmatic truth, and also the use of the notion of Taoic harmony. But for Harris, it's obviously his practice. But in the context with the ground of being, it's subservient to both of them for the sake of the truth of their quadrants. And I think it's interesting that Ken Wilber notes that Sam Harris, despite this theoretically being his, the waking up that is in his book and that his podcast is called, evaluates the benefit of meditative consciousness in a scientific and deterministic way. So again, it's subservient to his quadrant's view of the truth. So meditative consciousness, or let's just say the teal level, is a state of being able to see that everyone is right. Every one of the four quadrants are right. And this is a very difficult state to conceptualize because it means the thing that's compelling us all the time, what's better, what is good, is not to be found only in your preferred quadrant. You have to see that truth is in all the quadrants. So truth for Pirsig is dynamic quality. It's that leading edge of experience, the front end of the train that is on the quality track. What's better? It's the Tao, the Buddha. It's the source of subjects and objects. It's the mother of the myriad creatures. It's the only thing that's certain. It's the fundamental harmony, the aha moment. It is Poincaré's subliminal self. It is Nagarjuna's emptiness.
And the real genius of Mahayana Buddhism, a guy named Nagarjuna, basically came out in his whole notion of emptiness is that you can't literally say anything about the relative world that will end up being absolutely true, because you'll always end up contradicting yourself. So he had a very, very sophisticated dialectic that basically said, take any characteristic you want. It can be free will, or it can be determinism. It can be consciousness, or it can be matter. It can be truth, or it can be falsity. And call that X, and then he demonstrates that reality actually is neither X, nor non-X, nor both, nor neither. That nothing you can say about the world is ultimately correct, including what I just said. And including what I just said there. And that too.
As Wilber illustrated with the not now, now is not truth. This is an example in the moment of dynamic quality creating static quality. As soon as something is conceptualized, it becomes static and the dynamic quality is gone. But it's a great illustration of that moment of dynamic quality that causes you to articulate what you think it is, and then you've lost it. But that is how, the world is, that is how the universe is constructed. Now, theory is one thing, but practice is another. And both Wilber and Pirsig felt that being in touch with the ground of being, or being attuned to dynamic quality, was a matter of achieving a state of satori or enlightenment. An important part of this understanding is Nagarjuna's notion of shunyata, which is non-dual understanding, which is the act of relating to a fundamental harmony, the act of seeing that harmony and being keyed into dynamic quality.
And the whole point of Nagarjuna and all of Mahayana Buddhism and virtually all the world's mystics agree is that in order to see this ultimate reality, you have to directly experience it. You have to actually awaken it yourself. And until that happens, everything you say about it's wrong because you're just not in touch with it. So you can say, well, it's God, it's not God, it's atheistic. It doesn't matter. You still don't know it. So everything you're saying is ultimately not right. And you keep doing that until you awaken the second mode of knowing that plugs you in to this direct first-person experience of a ground of all being. That's called enlightenment. That's called awakening, and so on. And that really is a mystery. And that's why Nagarjuna called it emptiness.
There are true mystics, and these are people who, through a lot of hard work, think Nisargadatta and Wilber himself, or through a dark night of the soul, think Ramana Maharshi or St. John of the Cross, or through a sudden awakening, think Eckhart Tolle or Teresa of Avila, become permanently in touch with that emptiness, that ground of being, and they live their lives in that space. And it's hard for Westerners to grasp this kind of truth because we're really oriented towards rationality and towards success. And you'll notice that even meditation or Buddhism can become fashionable and competitive in the West. You're not really making or doing things which define you in this kind of consciousness. It kind of topples the hierarchical nature of the I and the hierarchical nature of Western civilization. And that's really tough on us as Westerners. However, remember in Zen what is said about enlightenment. Before enlightenment, drawing water and chopping wood. After enlightenment, drawing water and chopping wood. And I think that this kind of meshing with the ground of being isn't annihilation of your engagement with the material or the subject-object or the dualistic world. Rather, it's, as Alan Watts once said, it's just like regular life, but 2 inches off the ground.
And the whole point of that is you keep doing these meditative practices until you awaken that mode of awareness. And then you have this direct experience. And it can neither be described as deterministic or free will, causal or free. And that's the ultimate state of a Buddhist or mystical orientation. So when we get in those kinds of arguments, that's at least one thing worth keeping in mind. You can still give your relative arguments about which seems to work best in the relative realm. And that's why I say that a creative advance into novelty turns out to be probably the best way to describe that.
You continue to pursue what you always did, struggling with it and getting joy out of it. And yes, climbing that invariable hierarchy. You just take it a lot less seriously because the hierarchy is embedded in the harmony of the universe.
The only way you're going to be able to know the real answer to any of that is to experience that pure ground. And then that will solve the issue for you in a direct and immediate sense.
Anyway, I hope that made sense, and I'll see you next time.